claim the woman he loves, this wealthy man actually decides to personally unalive the wife who has been by his side for many years. He first opens the window wide on a winter night of 40 degrees below zero, and immediately following that, he quickly extinguishes the fire in the hearth. Even as the bone-chilling wind rages through the room, he still pulls back the quilt covering his wife without a moment's hesitation. Yet in the face of her husband's maddening deed, the woman doesn't even harbor a single thought of resistance. As it turns out, his wife had become a vegetable due to an accident as early as 10 years ago. However, at the wife's funeral, his 7-year-old daughter doesn't show a hint of sadness, but instead runs into the arms of the new female teacher in front of everyone and lets out a heart-wrenching cry.
Mama.
In an instant, everyone begins to curse this poisonous woman for seizing a place that doesn't belong to her. But absolutely no one knows that behind this cruel unaliving lies a ridiculous transaction that stretches back 7 years. 7 years ago, to pay off her father's debts, Elizabeth was forced to sign a contract to bear a child for another man. A noble man hid behind a screen, issuing cold commands to Elizabeth through an elderly maid. At this moment, Elizabeth is like a piece of merchandise waiting to be priced, letting the man's gaze wander freely over her body. The wealthy man's conditions are demanding to the extreme. They are to spend 3 nights together in an inn, but during that time, they must keep their true identities hidden from each other. As long as she can give birth to a healthy child, she can walk away with a reward of £500. But the price is that after the child is born, she must disappear completely and is never allowed to acknowledge her own flesh and blood for the rest of her life. Elizabeth has no other choice. She naively believes that as long as she endures these 3 nights, she can regain her life. But she never imagined that from the moment she put a price tag on herself, she was jumping into a bottomless abyss with her own feet. Following that humiliating contract, Elizabeth arrives at the remote inn as agreed. She trembles as she pushes open the door, expecting to be met by a greasy old man. But what greets her eyes is a melancholy aristocrat with extremely gentlemanly manners. Even more surprising to her is that this high and mighty client seems even more flustered than she is at this moment. Elizabeth strips off her clothing amidst her inner struggle, as at this moment, she only wants this nightmare of a transaction to end as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Charles is involuntarily gulping down strong liquor, as if that is the only way to suppress the unspeakable pain and guilt in his heart. And so, their first night begins in a deathly silence. 2 strangers who have never met before must endure this kind of boundary-crossing intimacy upon their first encounter, filled with tension, shame, and a humiliation that reaches deep into their bones. After everything is over, Elizabeth quickly fastens her buttons and, carrying what remains of her self-respect, walks out of the room with determination. Staring at Elizabeth's departing back, Charles falls into a state of deep remorse. If not for that unspeakable predicament, he would never have wanted to desecrate a girl in such a despicable manner. The guilt in his heart drives him to take the initiative and find Elizabeth.
You think what we're doing is wrong? You at least are doing it for someone else. I too have a duty to someone else.
Then, sir, since neither of us are here for our own pleasure, perhaps what we do isn't so very wrong.
This brief conversation causes 2 souls that were meant to be parallel to experience a violent collision. Elizabeth is surprised to find that the Charles before her is not an arrogant or debauched aristocrat, while Charles begins to realize that what he bought is not just a vessel for reproduction. Soon, the second transaction begins beside the flickering firelight. But this time, the air in the room is no longer as bone-chilling as it was the night before. Elizabeth keenly senses that her long-frozen heart has actually begun to beat wildly for this buyer. She desperately warns herself in her mind to stay awake and sober. But the more she wants to escape, the tighter her body and soul become entangled, as the flame known as firelight has completely burned away the boundaries of the contract. This emotional entanglement is like a wildfire spreading across the plains, and Charles eventually finds Elizabeth standing alone by the sea. At this moment, the waves are surging, just like the restless hearts they both possess. As their conversation deepens, the loneliness and oppression they usually keep from others begin to flow quietly between them. The barrier of their status becomes blurred in this moment, and the distance between them is quietly closed by a faded understanding. But as soon as the 3-night transaction ends, Charles changes back into that arrogant and unfamiliar aristocrat. Elizabeth is placed on the ship that is destined for departure. Even though they both know in their hearts that those 3 days of passion were essentially just a transaction, they still inevitably fall into a deep abyss of emotion. Perhaps a contract can buy a body, but it can never buy out the attraction of a soul. In truth, Charles is not cold-hearted by nature. He has been trapped in a marriage that exists in name only for 10 whole years. This relationship is not just a physical attraction, but rather two lonely souls huddling together for warmth in a frozen world. 10 months later, accompanied by a heart-wrenching scream, Elizabeth gives birth to a baby girl.
There, my pet. All over now.
She desperately wants to take one look at her child, but the butler sent by Charles turns and leaves with the baby without a moment's hesitation. What they do not know is that they can never restrain her maternal instincts. During the years she is separated from her child, she buys a blank sketchbook. Every year on her daughter's birthday, she draws a beautiful plant inside of it. These drawings are not random doodles, but are the only anchor keeping her alive, because she firmly believes that as long as the firelight still burns, she must take her daughter back. Driven by this obsession, she crosses the ocean and searches bitterly among the aristocratic manors of England in the guise of a governess. Finally, she tracks down the whereabouts of that man from years ago. As luck would have it, Charles is currently hiring a governess for his daughter, and Elizabeth successfully secures the position. But as soon as she steps through the door, she hears a piece of news from the servants that feels like a knife to her heart. Because she grew up without a mother's love, coupled with the deformed indulgence Charles provides out of guilt, her long-lost daughter Louisa has turned into a violent, ignorant, and spoiled child. So far, she has already driven away 3 teachers with her harsh words. A servant tells Elizabeth that the young lady usually likes to hide in the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Elizabeth then walks through the deep and oppressive corridor, looking toward that blurry figure in the center of the lake from a distance. In an instant, a wave of immense joy and bitterness swallows her whole, and for a moment, this strong mother is left completely at a loss. She instinctively retreats back into the long corridor, hiding behind the frost-covered glass window while watching from a distance as that small figure slowly closes the gap. She wants more than anything to rush forward and hold her daughter tight, but in the face of that cruel contract, she can only treat her own flesh and blood as a total stranger.
Who are you?
Miss Laurier, your new governess.
Then bugger away, lady.
Facing her daughter's sharp edges, she doesn't get angry, but instead believes that Louisa's bossiness isn't because she is spoiled, but because she is afraid of losing things. Therefore, the girl behaves like a little beast raised in the wild, using a body full of thorns to drive away everyone who gets close. Because only in this way, on the day she is abandoned, can she say that she was the one who didn't want them first. But when she watches Louisa turn back into an innocent and romantic girl in Charles's arms, she finally finds peace. Even if that brilliant smile doesn't belong to her. Even if she can only be an anonymous spectator through the glass. For this reason, she also decides to meet with Charles, whom she hasn't seen in 7 years. But just as Elizabeth cautiously appears in the living room, the smile on Charles's face freezes instantly. In that moment, shock and fear swallow him whole. He is terrified that the secret will be exposed, so he immediately pulls Elizabeth into a room. He then prepares to fire Elizabeth, but is told that firing a governess requires a 1-month notice. Otherwise, the employer will face severe penalties. Charles is forced to compromise. He then finds Elizabeth and takes her to a room upstairs.
This is my wife, Amelia. I tell Amy everything. She knows Louisa's my daughter. But I've promised her that I'll never shame her before the world. No one else knows but you. If there's any pity in you for my wife's wasted life, swear that you'll keep our secret.
I swear.
At this moment, Elizabeth is enduring psychological torture that is unimaginable to an ordinary person. As the biological mother, she is standing right in front of her daughter, yet she must wear a mask and treat her own flesh and blood like a stranger. Charles's coercion is cruel, as he uses his wife's tragic state as a form of moral kidnapping to firmly grip Elizabeth's weakness. But for Elizabeth, as long as she can watch her daughter grow up, it is a form of immense happiness. And so, Elizabeth gains 1 month to spend with her daughter. Yet on the very first day of her home tutoring, Louisa proves to be incredibly resistant toward Elizabeth.
You're poor, I suppose.
Yes?
I don't have to do what you say.
At this moment, Elizabeth isn't angry, but only feels a deep, aching sadness in her heart. She knows better than anyone that the way her daughter has turned out is the bitter fruit of that transaction from years ago. If she allows the girl to continue being so arrogant and spoiled, her entire life will be completely ruined. For this reason, she secretly vows that even if she is hated by her daughter, she must bring her back onto the right track. So, during the second lesson, even though Louisa is screaming and crying at the top of her lungs, Elizabeth remains completely unmoved. The sounds of Louisa's cries finally reach Charles's ears, and he rushes to the scene immediately. Looking into Elizabeth's eyes, which are nearly frantic yet incredibly clear, Charles ultimately chooses to back down. He finally realizes that his long-term so-called love was actually just enabling his daughter's decline. As Charles's heavy footsteps fade away, Louisa collapses weakly onto the cold floor. It isn't until the servant brings lunch that she finally stands up, but her eyes reveal a fierce and defiant look. Even though Louisa tries her best to hurt her, Elizabeth remains completely unbothered. Finally, Louisa gives in and agrees to begin her studies. Elizabeth brings out some hand-painted cards and patiently explains every single word. Those originally cold and lifeless letters come to life under her vivid descriptions. Before long, the little monster who once shouted about driving away every teacher becomes the most devoted student in the manor. Elizabeth thought their relationship was slowly improving, but to her surprise, Louisa becomes a completely different person the next day. Louisa's sharp words sting Elizabeth like a physical blow.
Shall we start our lessons?
You're just a servant.
That's enough! Be silent! You will not speak disrespectfully to me or raise your voice to me. You will obey me whether you want to or not.
Servant, servant.
She picks up the paint on the table and splashes it violently onto Louisa's face, then immediately splashes another cup onto her own.
Every profession will be close to you, but one. And that one is a life of loneliness and humiliation. They lock you up, Louisa!
This isn't just some ordinary home education anymore. This is a woman from the bottom of society who has endured a cruel world, imparting the most hardcore laws of survival to her next generation. Because of ignorance and poverty, she was once bought and sold as nothing more than a breeding machine. She knows deep down just how fragile women are in this cannibalistic, patriarchal society. She will never allow her own flesh and blood to repeat the suffocating mistakes that nearly destroyed her. Under Elizabeth's guidance, Louisa not only learns to read and write, but also develops a deep attachment to this strict yet gentle teacher. What truly connects their souls is the magic of the firelight that Elizabeth brings into their lives. Louisa immerses herself in this romantic fairy tale and finally opens her heart completely to Elizabeth.
The sick lady is not my real mother.
Do you ever see her?
Of course, every day.
What do you do with her?
Just be with her.
However, the magic of firelight is a dangerous key that unlocks sin and desire for the adults in the house. Seeing the maternal glow radiating from Elizabeth, Charles's heart, which has been suppressed for 10 long years, fully revives. That brief encounter 7 years ago had already planted a spark of fire in both of their hearts. Now, living under the same roof day after day, this spark finally transforms into a wildfire, burning through all their defenses of reason. During the day, they still strictly observe social etiquette and maintain a cold, professional distance. But as soon as night falls, they shed all their disguises and greedily seek the warmth that society does not allow. But this is ultimately a revelry on the edge of a dangerous cliff. Charles's playboy father left behind massive debts, and court appraisers come to the manor every day, pushing it toward a forced auction. What makes him even more desperate is that his paralyzed wife, Amy, is still lying in the room upstairs. As long as Amy lives, Elizabeth will always be a mistress hidden in the shadows, and their daughter will never be able to openly call her mother. The three of them are like prisoners trapped in an ice cellar with no way out. Although Amy is innocent, her soulless shell has locked away the vitality of the manor and the lives of everyone inside it. In this unsolvable deadlock, someone has to take on the weight of the deepest sin. The final straw that breaks the camel's back is a confession from Amy's sister, Constance. She has taken care of the home for her sister for 10 years and has secretly loved Charles for just as long. But after seeing the ambiguous looks exchanged between Charles and Elizabeth, she realizes she will always be an outsider. With bankruptcy looming, Constance prepares to leave the manor to find her own life.
But the house died the day Amy didn't die.
Her parting words instantly open a forbidden door in Charles's mind. He suddenly realizes that as long as Amy is alive, Elizabeth and his daughter will never find true happiness. For this reason, he makes a cruel decision. On a winter night of 40 degrees below zero, he personally ends his wife's life. Is this decision right? From a moral and legal standpoint, he has indeed committed an unforgivable crime. But in that old era, where divorce was forbidden and euthanasia was seen as desecration, if a dead marriage isn't buried, the living will be trapped in the tomb forever. Charles takes all the sin and the punishment of hell upon his own shoulders. He ends his wife's 10-year paralyzed nightmare and forcibly carves out a path for the woman and daughter he loves. This is the flower of evil blooming in the darkest abyss of human nature. After the funeral, Charles confesses everything to Elizabeth in the privacy of the study.
Are you sorry?
Perhaps the love of adults isn't always a clean fairy tale, as it is sometimes a vine cast from selfishness, sacrifice, and even sin. However, no secret stays hidden forever, and the greatest crisis finally arrives. Louisa had already sensed the unusual feelings between her father and the teacher. She sneaks into Elizabeth's room and finds that hidden sketchbook. There are no words inside, only beautiful drawings of plants with dates marked that match her own birthday. All the clues connect in this single moment, and Louisa finally understands why this teacher is so strict, yet so tolerant. She finally realizes why Elizabeth's eyes are always filled with tears when she looks at her.
Why did you give me away?
In that moment, the defense Elizabeth had spent 7 years building completely collapses.
Why did you give me away?
I didn't. I sold you.
How much for?
£500.
Is that a lot?
It's a fortune.
Just as Elizabeth expects Louisa to curse her for abandoning her for money, the mother and daughter can no longer control their emotions, and they embrace each other tightly. Louisa buries her head in Elizabeth's arms and, with all her strength, finally lets out that heart-wrenching cry. Elizabeth bluntly admits to the financial transaction from years ago. This bone-deep honesty actually earns her the deepest forgiveness and understanding from her daughter. At this moment, aristocratic pride and the cold contracts of trade all turn to ash in the face of powerful maternal love. At the end of the story, the oppressive manor is sold at auction, but Charles, having lost all his wealth, finally shows a long-lost smile. He is no longer a prisoner held hostage by his family and his paralyzed wife. For him, bankruptcy isn't destruction, it's a rebirth. On a snowy winter day, Charles drives a simple carriage, taking Elizabeth and Louisa away from that cold cage forever. The carriage rolls over the thick snow, leaving behind a winding trail as they head toward the unknown distance. They have nothing left, but they finally have each other and true freedom. The movie ends here. In my view, the core of Firelight is actually the awakening of a woman. When Elizabeth was pushed into an ice cellar by fate, she did not choose to accept her end in silence. Instead, she tempered herself into a fire that burned through class and social convention. That cup of red paint splashed on her face was not just a protest against the era, but a spiritual armor she forged for her own flesh and blood. Nowadays, we are no longer trapped in the same desperate circumstances as Elizabeth, but in the hidden reefs of reality, there are still countless women caught in invisible contracts and social prejudices. True female awakening is never about waiting passively for salvation. It is about having the courage, like Elizabeth, to light that spark in the ruins even after seeing the cruelty of life. Because only when you become the source of light will the darkness trying to imprison you finally vanish.